Hello, I'm Ron Senior, and I'm the current chair of the Board of Directors of the Colorado Society of CPAs. I'd like to spend a few moments talking to you about professional issues. There's one significant Colorado issue and several national and international issues I'll touch upon. CPA Council meets twice a year, fall and spring, and every other year the spring meeting is held in Washington, D.C. We just returned from our Washington, D.C. meeting. We discussed many issues that are important to our profession, including several briefings on legislative issues, prior to a day where we went to the Hill and met with our Colorado elected officials, including our 2 U.S. senators and our elected congressmen and congresswomen. There are 4 primary talking points that we talked about with our elected officials. The first being re-regulation of the financial services industry, including broker-dealers, hedge funds, and investment advisors. The focus being on those individuals and entities that have custodial and clearing responsibility. We believe that those entities and individuals should be subjected to audits, and the way to accomplish this is by empowering the SEC to carry out their mandate, together with the PCAOB, the Public Company Auditing Oversight Board, being empowered to carry out their charge as well. We also talked about tax patents. There are currently 70 tax patents that have been issued and roughly 110 that are pending. We believe that this is not a good application and limits access to the Internal Revenue Code, so we support the Council in supporting legislation to not allow tax patents to exist. We talked about workforce mobility. Workforce mobility has to do with individuals that work in several jurisdictions outside of their home jurisdiction, and when they need to pay income taxes in those alternate jurisdictions, and when their employers need to do payroll withholding. We support a concept that if an individual works in a particular jurisdiction for 30 days on a cumulative basis in a calendar year, that they should be subject to taxes in those alternate jurisdictions, and the employer should be required to withhold. We also talked to our elected officials and their staff about all of the resources our profession can bring to bear to help them and their constituents deal with the professional issues we're facing and the economic crisis that we're currently experiencing. We talked about the Economic Crisis Resource Center that the AICPA has instituted. We talked about financial literacy and the 360 Degrees of Financial Literacy program and the Feed the Pig program that are all getting high marks from those that have been involved in those. Other important issues that we touched upon are the regulation and dissemination of tax return information under Internal Revenue Code 7216 and what should be done to straighten that out, because it has some unusual impacts on CPA practitioners in terms of when they can provide tax return information to their clients and at their clients' request to other third-party individuals. We talked about steps to allow the CPA exam to be taken outside of the U.S. and what needs to be done in terms of protocols and the security measures for that, as well as issues with regard to the globalization of accounting credentials generally, and how we should support maintaining the strength of the CPA brand internationally. We talked about estate tax issues and legislation that's pending with regard to fixing the current sunset of the estate tax laws. We talked about fair value accounting and the recently enacted Statement of Financial Accounting Standard 157E that's moderated how 157 is applied. We talked about the PhD program, which is very exciting. The Colorado Society, together with many other state societies and large CPA firms, have funded an effort to increase accounting faculty at U.S. institutions, and there are roughly 30 PhD candidates that have been added to curriculums to expand the capacity for teaching accounting students. CPA mobility that we've recently resolved in Colorado, but we still have some issues with other states enacting CPA mobility issues. We talked a bit about AMT taxes that have been fixed every year on an annual basis, and telling our legislators that they need to try to find a permanent fix for AMT and how that gets resolved. Closer to home, we have one primary issue, as I mentioned. It's the sunset review of the state statutes that regulate licensure of CPAs. This happens every 5 years in our state, and the process is currently underway for the introduction of legislation in early 2010 to reenact the statutes that provide for CPA licensure. There are 2 key issues regarding this legislation. The first is the 150-hour requirement. Colorado is one of very few jurisdictions that don't require 150 hours of education to sit for and receive the CPA exam, and we believe we should conform with most other jurisdictions. If we don't, it can severely impact the mobility of CPAs that get their CPA in Colorado and might want to practice somewhere else later down the road. The other primary issue is mandatory peer review. Colorado, again, is one of very few jurisdictions that don't require mandatory peer review for licensed CPAs. Now, it is true if you're a member of the state society or the AICPA, you're required by those rules to undergo peer review under the normal protocols. But if you don't belong to either of those organizations in this state, you can opt out of peer review, and we don't think that's appropriate. So we support, in the current legislation that's being written, to allow for mandatory peer review in Colorado. In closing, there's a lot of activity that we're monitoring and reflecting on in our work as the board of directors of your state society, together with the staff of your state society. The Young Professionals Group is very active. The CFO Roundtable also has increased participation. Visit CSCPA.org for more information, or call the state society on any of these issues or anything else that we can help you with. I thank you for your time today.